Our honoree this evening has labored for decades as an investment pioneer, entrepreneur, and much more on a global basis. During that time, we've witnessed the rise and fall of socialist experiments in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. And today, markets are empowering and uplifting the lives of billions of people. Few can better discuss the significance of this trend than our first speaker. Klaus is, as I've mentioned, the former Prime Minister and also former Finance Minister of the Czech Republic, and currently serves as President of the Chamber of Deputies for the Parliament of the Czech Republic. A graduate of the Prague School of Economics, he's one of the founders of the Czechoslovak Civic Forum in 1990. He was elected chairman of the Civic Democratic Party. Having been the first non-communist finance minister for more than 40 years, actually, he's recipient of numerous awards and honorary degrees. As I mentioned, Václav also graciously served as honorary co-chairman for tonight's program. So I'm very pleased to introduce Václav Klaus.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I don't know why I am the first one who is asked to say a few words, and I don't know what to say when everyone is still eating. But let me use the opportunity of awarding Sir John Templeton the prize he deserves very much, for saying a few words about the topic, about one of his topics, about the importance of clear, simple, classical liberal ideas in the process I happen to participate in the process of transition of the whole societies from communism to a free society and market economy, in the process which was made possible by the fact that people like Sir John Templeton didn't stop fighting for freedom, for basic liberal ideas, for free markets. I will try to say something from my own experience, which is probably unique in this audience here tonight. I have to start with something that has not been sufficiently stressed or sufficiently understood during the last decade. I would dare to say that the communist system collapsed, that the communist system was not defeated. It collapsed because it was already in an advanced stage of decomposition, and because it gradually lost its two strongest constitutive elements, the fear on the one hand and the faith on the other. In its final days, the communist system became both soft and unconvincing, and such a state of affairs was not sufficient for safeguarding its further continuation. It's an irony of history that communism sort of melted down. This is, however, not the main story. It has often been stated that the collapse of communism created a very strange vacuum. This argument seems plausible, but it's not correct in my opinion. What remained after communism was not a vacuum. We inherited weak and therefore non-efficient markets, and similarly we inherited a weak and not efficient democracy. Both the economic and political mechanisms were shallow. The political and economic agents, the players of the game, were not properly established and constituted. Some of them were totally new, all of them were weak and fragile, and the outcomes of their interplay were less efficient than in a full-grown free society you know from your own country. At the same time, it was not possible to overcome such a state of affairs by introducing a ready-made, imported, from outside delivered system. We had to undergo a difficult transformation process. No masterminding of the evolution of a free society by means of social engineering was possible. At the same time, it was not possible to wait for textbook conditions, which would mean waiting for perfect markets, for a sufficient degree of market efficiency. The quick abolition of old institutions was a sine qua non for success, because it was the only way how to minimize the heavy transition or transformation costs. The consistency in pursuing a free market course in the following years was crucial, and we had to privatize, to liberalize, and to deregulate the economy as fast as possible. When I say we, it brings me to my fourth point, which is close to Sir Templeton's philosophy and thinking. What about the people? Were they ready for such a rapid change? Does free society presuppose, in addition to the creation of its basic institutions, some set of values or moral standards that would properly anchor the whole society? Do the people need an interim period of schooling? Is such a schooling possible? Are there teachers for such a procedure? Are the people willing to be educated? My answer to these and similar questions is simple. Freedom requires responsibility and ethical behavior, but at the same time the people are always ready and they do not need a special schooling. What they need is a free space for their voluntary activities. What they need is the elimination of unnecessary controls and prohibitions of all kinds. Our experience tells me that the flexibility and the adaptability of the people was the main source of our success. After the collapse of hard communism, we succeeded in rejecting all kinds of third ways between capitalism and socialism, which are so fashionable these days. We succeeded in avoiding romantic nationalism. We succeeded in overcoming utopian and therefore dangerous attempts to forget everything and to start building a brave new world based on a prioristic, moralistic, and elitist ambitions of those who are better than the rest of us. But we shouldn't lose with statist, interventionist, paternalistic social democratism, which we see in so many societies to the west of us, including this country. We know, and we who are here tonight, I am sure know that it's our permanent task and duty to attack the expanding state, which was an overwhelming tendency of the 20th century, of the century of socialisms with the whole variety of confusing adjectives. We are greatly honored to have among us individuals who spend their lives defending free society, defending free markets, defending the power of ideas and the power of classical liberal ideas. We are honored to have here tonight Sir John Templeton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Václav. The story that Václav tells is one that few of us can imagine. John Templeton was one of the very first members of the Young Presidents Organization many years ago. He later became a member of the World Presidents Organization and the Chief Executives Organization, for which he was elected as president in 1968. Our next speaker worked very closely with John for many of these years. John Schroeder, in fact, was president of Templeton, Dobrow and Vance, and is currently director of Morgan Stanley Dean Witter Funds and Trust Company of the West Dean Witter Funds. Jack received his MBA in finance from New York University. He's been chairman and CEO of Axe Houghton Funds, president and CEO of Keystone Custodian Funds, and member of the boards of many top financial, insurance, and other firms. Also a member of the Chief Executives Organization, Jack is a former president of YPO. I'm very pleased to introduce Jack Schroeder.
I've been asked to take us back a little bit to the days of John's work in New Jersey before he moved to the Bahamas, back in the 50s and 60s, when he started so many of the things that developed eventually into such great things. I first became familiar with John when I worked at Citibank as a young analyst, where the reading of the Templeton letter was required reading. And I used to look forward to the Templeton letter coming out, mainly because John had a brilliant way of taking very complex subjects and making them sound simple. And they were often contrarian. I remember one time he, at the time when the oil industry was like the internet companies of today. Oil stocks were going up to big heights, mainly because it was assumed that oil prices would go up forever. And John came out with his letter and pricked that balloon by saying that indeed we were heading toward a time of a world glut in oil. And of course that was very sacrilegious at the time. On the other hand, he also, I remember in one of his letters, recommended that people look at airlines. No one wanted airlines because they were losing money, but John was able to point out that the coming of the jet age was going to rearrange the profit structure of the airline industry, and his clients were able to benefit by their investments going up fivefold in 3 years. When I first went to work for John, I had to learn his techniques of how to search for bargains in young growth companies worldwide. That was interesting and very enlightening to learn his techniques. But the most interesting was I came from an environment of a bank mentality where the job of a security analyst was to examine the past record. John said, no, I want you to tell me about the future. Imagine a young analyst being asked to do that, how exciting that was. John's interest in international investing in those days was really not surprising. Having studied at Oxford under a Rhodes Scholarship and afterwards traveling around the world on a shoestring, he knew a lot about international. And it was difficult in those days to get clients to invest overseas. I remember he wanted us to put stocks in Japan into every one of the clients' portfolios, and we had to convince the clients it was worth doing because they had to, in those days, commit to leaving their money there for 7 years. Of course, they were amply rewarded for their patience. Another very interesting incident I remember one time, John and I and others were at the Federal Reserve of New York, and we were being lectured about the importance of maintaining fixed currencies. And that was the big job of the Fed. Of course, this was long before President Nixon closed the gold window. And I remember John standing up and saying, why don't we just let the free market decide what currency should be? And there was a hush in the room. That was sacrilege. That was spitting on the Fed's Bible. Well, how right he was in the long run. As I worked with John, I also began to see another side of him, and that is his spiritual strength. I remember traveling with him one time up to Canada. I was by then his executive VP, and I said to him, John, can you tell me how you can reconcile your very frugal living with your generosity toward your charities? And John said, Jack, when you have 10 apples and you give 9 away in the temporal world, you have 1 apple left. But in the spiritual world, if you have 10 apples and give 9 away, you still have 10 apples. John was the first entrepreneur I met. He was always looking for new, exciting ideas. And it is not surprising then, he was among the first, possibly the first person to create a mutual fund devoted entirely to investing outside the U.S. And it was named the Templeton Growth Fund of Canada. His love for international investing, his love for entrepreneurs and for young growth companies naturally drew him to the company of other entrepreneurs, and therefore it is not at all surprising that he became one of the original members of the Young Presidents Organization. He eventually went on to become president of the successor organization, the Chief Executives Organization. I have here a letter which I'd like to read from the current president of CEO. I know there are many members of CEO in the audience, including some ex-presidents. Dear John, on behalf of CEO, I would like to offer our most sincere and heartfelt congratulations to you this evening. As an internationally renowned entrepreneur, business leader, humanitarian, author, educator, philanthropist, and founder of the Templeton Prize, your many contributions have been recognized by world leaders. As a past president of Chief Executives Organization, your contributions continue to be felt. May you enjoy this evening and know how proud CEO is of your many accomplishments and to have you as part of our organization. With great warmth, Stan Miller, President. There's an old saying that no man is a hero to his butler. But I can tell you, after 40 years of working with John and knowing John, he's still my hero. And furthermore, I think he's one of the greatest men of the 20th century.
Thank you very much, Jack. Business ventures of all sorts, as many of the people here know, exist to provide goods and services for people, and the competitive market process of commerce inspires and incents entrepreneurs to adopt and adapt and innovate in unforeseen ways that produce what many realize is essentially an ever-expanding array of better, cheaper, and more convenient products. This creative process and knowledge of it is not a new concept. It's been described by economists ranging from Adam Smith and Jean-Baptiste Say to Joseph Schumpeter and Ludwig von Mises. Our next speaker is a leader among economists. Michael Boskin is the Tully Friedman Professor of Economics and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. As I mentioned, he's former chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. He's also currently chairman of the Congressional Advisory Committee on Taxation and the panel of advisors to the Congressional Budget Office. He's the author of over 100 books and articles. He received his PhD at my alma mater, which is the University of California, Berkeley. And he's a recipient of numerous awards, including the Adam Smith Prize, which he will receive this coming Monday from the National Association of Business Economists. I've also had the pleasure of working with Michael. We were both co-members of the Executive Committee for the Templeton Collegiate Honor Rolls for Education in the Free Society during the last 2 years. So I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Boskin.
Thank you, David. Chris and I are honored to be here. It's a privilege to be here to help honor Sir John Templeton as he receives the de Tocqueville Award from the Independent Institute. It's also a privilege to be here to participate in supporting the Independent Institute for all of its good work. I first met Sir John Templeton perhaps a quarter century ago at an event organized by Theroux Kaiser, who I'm sure must have introduced me somehow as a bright young economist. I hope I still earn one of those adjectives. Upstairs, Sir John put that in perspective when he said, "Oh, Mike, I just met your daughter." He was referring to my wife. Whether John is going to pursue a career in politics or diplomacy or is just evidencing his wonderful sense of humor and timing, I'll leave to you to decide. I have a few simple points I would like to make. The first and most important is that liberty, freedom, justice, decency, generosity of both resources and spirit requires champions, defenders, exemplars, heroes. Such a man is Sir John Mark Templeton. Innovation, really fundamental innovation, such as global investing, which has enriched both literally and figuratively our lives in so many direct and indirect ways. Innovation requires vision, courage, a wider range of talents, perhaps a dash of luck. Few are fortunate to be able to be a leader in any field. Sir John Mark Templeton is a leader, and I deliberately use the current tense, in finance, in education, in philanthropy, in religion, to name only a few. How remarkable. A brilliant financier, someone who indeed is a superstar in the galaxy or the Hall of Fame of finance, and someone who has spent so much of his time and resources giving back to the community and to the world that was so good to this man from Tennessee. What a remarkable story. But most of all, Sir John's career, his life, the way he has, does, and will conduct it, call out to all of us, to find something in us, in our religion, in our families, in our own personal sense of justice, decency, and honor, to stand up and be counted for liberty and freedom, personal, political, and economic. And I know everyone in this room is proud to join in that cause and joins me in thanking Sir John for his leadership. Thank you very much.